Doctor, give me the news. I got a bad case of the fantasy blues. Welcome to the Dynasty Vipers, Viper Bites injury series, talking about injury risk at the wide receiver position today. Hey, we've talked quarterbacks, we've talked running backs, we've talked tight ends. Now let's talk about those big play pass catchers. And unlike the running back position, only Chris Godwin and T. Higgins managed to crack the top 25 wide receivers in terms of fantasy production while playing less than 15 of their team's games. For receivers, though, it's not necessarily about missing time. It is about dealing with the effects of the injury. We have seen time and time again receivers step on the field simply to play the decoy role, which drives fantasy managers absolutely up the wall. Now, what doesn't drive anybody up the wall is taking a second and hitting that subscribe button, hitting that like button. And if you're listening to us on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Anchor, make sure to take a second and rate and review us. Now, let's get into the top 5 injury risk wide receivers heading into 2022. Starting off with New York Giants wide receiver Kenny Golladay. Now, Kenny Golladay always ends up on the list of players to avoid for me. You can put him on team never Sammy Watkins in reference to that list. Now, Golladay, he is right there. And you know what? No matter how you want to look at this, if you don't want to draft Kenny Golladay, you can legitimize that decision based on the injury history here as of late. Now, in 2018 and 2019, Golladay, he posted back-to-back 1,000-yard receiving seasons. And then somewhere in the offseason, the injury bug bit him while he was sleeping ahead of the 2020 training camp there, especially for the Detroit Lions. Now, Golladay, he missed all but 5 games that season, and he settled for a modest 338 receiving yards on 20 receptions. In 2021, a lot of us felt, you know what? A change of scenery will do him well. However, Golladay, he would go on to miss 3 games, and for the most part, he never seemed to be 100%. As the injuries that he was dealt with seemed to linger all season long. Now, I'm no doctor, but in my non-expert opinion, those injuries will continue to add up in 2022. It's all about the hips, and the hips don't lie. Now, let's take a look at some of this injury history that Kenny Golladay brings. We're only going to go back to 2020 here. September of that season, thigh, hamstring, those strains kind of added up. Then the hip issue kind of kept up, and probably one related to the other, to be honest with you. 2021, August, thigh, hamstring again. And then guess what happened in September? Yes, the hip. Then he had the knee. Then he had the chest in 2021. So basically, you can kind of tie, if the hamstring's about to go, the hip ain't too far behind. So who's next on my hit list here when it comes to the wide receiver position? Marquise Hollywood Brown. Now, he's a little bit of a smaller wide receiver, so if someone gets a good hit on him, it's probably not going to go well. But Brown, he is a polarizing character for me. When Hollywood is 100%, he is easily a top 15 wide receiver as far as fantasy is concerned. The problem is, though, he never seems to be consistently 100%. In early July, Brown was dealing with a hamstring issue, and it seemed to follow him into the regular season, eventually leading him to missing a contest in week number 11. Okay, let's call it a butt strain, because I just wanted to find a way to get the word butt into my video. But I've played enough operation to know that the butt, the thigh, the hamstring, they are all connected. Truth is, when you are dealing with nagging injuries, especially of the soft tissue variety, you often overcompensate other areas to protect ones, which in turn lead to, you guessed it, more injuries. Now, currently Brown is going as the wide receiver 25, which is kind of where I feel comfortable drafting him, as a wide receiver 2 with the ability to be a top 10 fantasy wide receiver, especially if Kyler Murray can stay healthy for all 15, 16, 17 games, which we're kind of hoping. But hey, a little bit of fizzle towards the end on Kyler Murray. Will that have an effect on Marquise Brown? More than likely. Now, we talked about those injuries. 2020, he had that Liz Frank injury there back in February. Then he had that patella strain there in October of 2020. And then when you want to look at his 2021 season, we had that thigh, that hamstring, followed by an ankle, followed by the butt strain. So there are some soft tissue injuries in Marquise Brown's history. And that's something to be a little bit concerning of moving forward. But hey, you're going to risk it with him because of what he can give you. He can give you wide receiver type 1 numbers. Like I said, if he's healthy and he's rolling, he is a top 15 asset right now. Now, a wide receiver who started off hot last year and then cooled off down the stretch, Mike Williams of the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, let's talk about Mike Williams for just a second here. When we look at this, Mike Williams, he kind of changed that injury narrative in 2021, and he got paid. But does a Tiger truly change their stripes? Now, this would have made a lot more sense if Mike Williams would have signed with the Bengals in the free agency period, but I still wanted to find a way to get that in there. Williams is coming off the board as the wide receiver 27. That's 3 spots behind Marquise Brown. While Williams didn't miss time last year, there were stretches where he simply did not show. His 1,146 receiving yards, 9 touchdowns, 76 receptions, that all looks great on the final line. But Williams posted 3 games with more than 65 yards while scoring just 3 times in the last 12 contests. Looking at his past injury history, my non-expert opinion says last season was more of an anomaly than anything else. And Williams is at best a wide receiver 3 at this time. If he manages to avoid injury here in 2022, there is a possibility that he could shake his injury-prone status, much like his teammate Keenan Allen has done. Now, what do those injuries look like? Let's go back to 2019. Lumbar, back spasms. August of 2020, shoulder AC joint. September 27th, 2020, hamstring. December 13th, 2020, lower back. So we do have a history of some back injuries that is a little bit alarming for me to put all my eggs in the basket to have him any higher than a wide receiver 3. Now, a wide receiver that I think we are, as a consensus, a little down on, that I have a little bit more high hope for, is Allen Robinson of the Los Angeles Rams. Yes, he is out of Chicago and he is into Los Angeles. Get rid of that cold winter and give him a little bit of that palm tree sunshine here with Matty Stafford and the Los Angeles Rams. Now, Robinson has missed, get this, 22 games since the start of 2017. In fact, the only time in which he's played more than 14 games in that period was in 2020. Unfortunately, bad QB is not the type of injury, especially when you think of who he's played with. Mitch Trubisky, Blake Bortles, unless you think that Justin Fields is considered an injury. But hey, Robinson was the wide receiver 81 last year in PPR scoring. And he's currently coming up board at wide receiver 41 and is being drafted in the late 8th, early 9th kind of round there in most leagues. And you know what? For me, I'm a bargain shopper. I like that value, and I think that's pretty good value for Allen Robinson. Now, I'll come out here and I'll say this. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. But I have to believe that his production is going to increase from 38 catches, 400 yards, and 1 touchdown with Matthew Stafford slinging the ball next season. Now, let's talk about these injuries that Robinson has. Let's kind of go back to 2017 when he had that ACL tear. And then in 2018, there was a groin. And then there was the rib. And in 2020, he had that concussion. And then in 2020, again, a little bit later there, December, that patella strain. Now, we don't have any documented injuries for Robinson last year, but he just seemed a little bit off. And I can't quite put my finger on it, but I think that change of scenery is going to do him well here this year. And then finally, number 5, number 5A, 5B, no matter how you want to look at it, let's give you 2 big name players here. Let's talk about Davante Adams of the Las Vegas Raiders and Deebo Samuel of the San Francisco 49ers. Both these guys are top 5 wide receivers when it comes to fantasy. Let's start about Davante Adams. We know he had some injuries in 2020, a little bit of an ankle, a little bit of a thigh there. Back in 2019, he had the toe. 18, there was a bit of a knee strain. Even star receivers, they carry a risk. Aaron Rodgers, he's played well without Davante Adams 11 times during Adams' tenure in Green Bay, in which Aaron Rodgers had to go on the field without him. He threw for 2,795 yards, 24 touchdowns, and a 112.7 QB rating. So Aaron Rodgers, he did pretty good without Adams in those 11 games there. Now, Adams with Derek Carr. He's coming over and playing with his old college teammate. In college, that Carr-Adams connection hooked up a lot. Good enough for 3,031 yards and 38 touchdowns there. Wide receiver 2 last season. He should be treated as a top 5 option again here this year. And then Deebo Samuel. Now, he is an interesting one for me. Are the 49ers frugal? Are they seriously scared by this injury rap sheet that Samuel has been accumulating since he came into the league? Look, let's just go back to 2019. There's a groin strain there. And then in 2020, October, hamstring. December, hamstring crept up again. 2021, we had that butt strain. Then we had a calf strain. And then we had the shin bruise. And then we hit the groin strain. And then in 2022, we had the knee strain. So in 2020, not a good year for Deebo Samuel. And it's no secret that Samuel, he requested a trade after catching 77 of his 121 targets this year for 1,405 yards, 6 touchdowns. Also rushing the ball 59 times for 365 and 8 more touchdowns in 16 contests. Great. Good season. He played. Now, while Samuel played all but 1 game last year after battling injuries, he played in only 7 games the year before. So that's something to keep in mind. Samuel, when he's on the field, he is a difference maker, both for the 49ers and for your fantasy squads. Forget what he did as a runner. We mentioned those numbers here. 59 carries, 365 yards, 8 touchdowns. Forget about that. If you just put his receiving numbers up on the board, he still finishes as a top 10 wide receiver. Does Samuel get traded? Unlikely. Does he hold out and miss some time? That is definitely possible. What else is possible? Let's talk about some of these other wide receivers. Let's do some myth busting here. Let's talk Brandon Cooks real quick. When we are talking about Brandon Cooks, he's got this injury prone, whatever you want to call it. We look at Brandon Cooks, oh, he's going to miss some time. Truth is, he has played 113 of his last 117 contests. That comes up to 97%. Yes, he has had concussion histories. He's had concussion problems going back. I think he's had about 6 concussions. I don't know what that number is. And yes, while you have concussion history, it increases the chance of you having another concussion, another one. Listen, every player is 1 hit away from no longer playing again. So we have to look at what he has been able to do in the last little bit. If you've played 97% of your games here, I'm okay with that. So you can dismiss that injury prone tag when it comes to Brandon Cooks. Now, a couple of little quick updates here on some other wide receivers. Michael Gallup, last season's injury there. We're looking at about a mid-November return. Can you build a contender ahead of December? If not, you might want to hold off on Michael Gallup. If you've got yourself a nice little roster there, whether it's Dynasty or redraft, Michael Gallup is a nice addition that you're going to get back probably close to 100% come December next year. Robert Woods, same situation. Look for him to become more effective come week number 9 as he's recovering from an ACL injury. I would expect him to be ready come training camp, but he will not be 100% until about midway through the season. Michael Thomas. The dude has had bad ankles for 2 years now. What is up with that? That cannot even be a thing anymore. Like, it must be so hard to run a slant pattern on wonky ankles. That's all I got to say about that. And then Chris Godwin. I'm not counting Godwin. I'm not relying on him. I'm not counting on him until mid-season. We're looking at October as being 9 months after that ACL surgery. Add a couple more months for him to get up to speed. I love myself some Russell Gage. I'm pro Russell Gage. So Chris Godwin, take a seat. I'm not risking it. I'm not risking the biscuit on Chris Godwin. I'd rather put my eggs in the basket of Russell Gage this year. A little bit later, a little bit more value there for your fantasy drafts. With that all being said, hey, when news breaks, when it all goes down, we got you covered. So you're going to make sure you're tuning in, get those notifications turned up because we'll get you covered. Don't worry.